to go ahead and go and mute while we speak, and then I'll definitely like tag you in. You'll be able to unmute and dive in. And then I will give a heads up that we'll be recording this event. That way we can share it with folks who missed out or got stuck on transit or, what have you. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive in. I'll introduce our guest of honor, Sachin. We'll have some Q&A, and we're hoping for just a really lively discussion. So please use the chat, ask questions. Feel free to send them to me directly, but very, very excited to facilitate. And with that, Sachin, we have a bit of a tradition here where we tend to do guest introductions for our Operator You Should Know session. And I could not think of anyone better to introduce you than Lexi, who is how I met you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lexi, who will give a super warm welcome.
All right, well, here's my biggest joy of 2021, to introduce one of my best friends in the entire world. Oh man, I love you so much. You're so amazing. I think that when I think about you, I just don't know anyone who's like as brilliant or creative or kind. And I think that you're funny and thoughtful and smart. And Nadia asked me to keep this short. So my summary was like, there's very little doubt in my mind that we're going to be learning from you from decades to come. So for everyone who hasn't met Sachin before, he's the CEO and co-founder of Cocoon, which is one of the most beautifully designed apps I've seen ever, and an incredible surfer, an amazing friend. And yeah, Nas was like, don't forget to tell everyone what he does. So I did that. But even more importantly, I think an amazing futurist. One of the things I love about you is how thoughtful you are about how people communicate, how we care about the people who really matter to us, like what that'll look like when we're trying to stay close to our families, whether the ones we grew up with or the ones we found along the way, our close groups of friends, the people who really make us feel at home. So I think it's going to be amazing to listen to you today and to hear your thoughts. And I really do think that Jeff and I reference things that you've written all of the time. You're my number one person I lean on to ask product questions to and to think about the future with. And I think it's a real gift, not only to be such a great friend because I love you to the ends of the earth, but to learn from you and to build with you and to design with you and to hear your thoughts. So without deep further ado, I'd like to introduce one of the fastest, best learners I've ever met, my very good friend, Sachin.
Thank you, Lexi. That was too kind, especially the bit about surfing, which for the record is a complete lie. But I just foolishly follow Lexi out into the waves sometimes and get like beaten up, which is always a pleasure. But thank you so much. That was, Fiona warned me that you might have a really extra kind intro, but I wasn't prepared for that.
Thank you, Lexi.
Well, it's very heartfelt and true.
Thank you, man. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Lex. I'd say Sachin, don't undersell yourself. You and Lexi are two of the biggest chargers I've seen with both waves and post-wave smoothies.
I'll take that.
Excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. I will just supplement Lexi's intro. In addition to being the co-founder and CEO of Cocoon, you have worked at Facebook for a very long time in product management and growth. And I think we're really excited to just hear your thoughts on lots of things. So we'll go ahead and dive in. I know you and I had talked about a couple of different themes. And I think one that is really striking with this group in particular is around transitions and different career transitions. You've had a few both from within Facebook transitioning to product management, and then after Facebook transitioning to being an entrepreneur and founder. And so I would love if you could just share a little bit about those transition moments in your experience and how you thought about them.
Sure. Okay, well, I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is that I was listening to this woman, Annie Dukes, who wrote this amazing book called Thinking in Bets, and she was a poker player, really fascinating thinker, and she said something that I thought really resonated with me that I hadn't really thought about at the time when I was making some of these transitions, but now I think I will think about for all future transitions, which was I forget the way she framed it, but it was basically that like very few decisions that you make are irreversible. And the thing that trips up a lot of people who know they want to do a thing and then don't do that thing forever is fear that like this is a one-way door. And then I'm like, and she brings up some funny examples, even like, you know, you think of things like marriage, and it's like that's hard to reverse. So you should think very deeply about that. But like very few things are like truly irreversible. And I felt like while I was at Facebook, I kind of had this like weird benefit of it was my first job out of college. I had actually left college early to join Facebook as an intern, and then I just stayed. And the program that I did my college was engineering at University of Waterloo, which is this co-op program. You do 4 months of school, 4 months of work, and you just alternate for 5 years. So it's kind of like constantly transitioning into the next thing. And when I decided to stay at Facebook for kind of like a very extended internship that lasted like 7 years, the way I thought about it was like, well, I'm learning a lot more just transitioning between Facebook jobs than I would kind of going back to school. And as soon as that stops being the case, then I should like go back to school, especially at that phase where I was just 100% focused on like optimizing for learning. And then I feel like that kind of made it even more clear how not costly it was to kind of seek out transitions. And while at Facebook, I got a chance to work on a bunch of different things, which was really fun, different functions like partnerships and growth and product management and different problem spaces. And it felt like kind of this really long, extended like college education, which was great. Leaving Facebook, I think the thing that comes to mind is I knew that there are a bunch of things that you need to figure out if you want to go and start a company or even do anything. Like if you don't want to start a company, but you want to go find a job, you still have to figure out what that next job is going to be. And the way I kind of thought about my transition outside of Facebook was if I look at all those ingredients, like I probably want to have some of them, but I definitely don't want to hold myself to a bar of having all of them. Like I don't need to like have like a co-founder and an idea and funding and like an office and like all these things. I was really lucky to find someone that I really enjoyed working with, who is my co-founder now, who we worked together at Facebook. And that was basically like, as soon as we kind of like found each other and like talked about maybe making this leap together, I felt like, hey, this is like, you know, literally we could probably just go get our jobs back at Facebook. This is not a reversible decision at all if we chose that we wanted to do that. And that felt like that was enough to kind of give me the confidence to go and make that transition. And we would figure out the rest together. And yeah, I don't know if any of those things are helpful, but those were two things that came to mind.
That's great. I feel like you're almost a student of transitions, which is really cool, as well as having experienced them. I think one sort of follow-up question that you and I had talked a little bit about, you know, thinking about change sort of in the world is really thinking about consumer social and the evolution there. And we talked about, you know, whether people are optimistic or pessimistic. And I think we can push that to our community to discuss a little bit too. But I would love if you could share some of your thoughts about the evolution of consumer social and how that is, you know, similar and different from other things that I've explored. We talked a little bit about cities, but yeah, share a little bit about some of your thoughts there, please.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm highly, highly optimistic about the future of consumer internet things. And the reason does kind of relate to cities. There is a connection there, which is that if you look at most of the reasons why people are pessimistic about the internet right now, there's a pretty like common pattern, I think, which is that all of obviously like the internet has caused problems. And we are experiencing lots of those problems right now. We're experiencing new ones every day, and we're like clearly figuring this out still. We have not figured it out yet. And most of the problems that we are facing, like the spread of misinformation, which can happen really quickly, like how easy it is to create bots that can like do things that you probably shouldn't be able to do. Just like you name it, like everything that like people are railing against right now. These are kind of all problems that have to do with the fact that we just like took a bunch of people and mashed them into a tiny space really quickly. And that is like a very weird thing that we have to grapple with. But it's not the first time that that happened, because we already ran this experiment with urbanization. And if you look at like this, there's like a really amazing chart that shows the percentage of people in a country that live in a city. And it's just like a series of curves that just all look like this. And basically like over a really short time span during the Industrial Revolution, urbanization just like became a thing. And it wasn't like a walk in the park when that happened. There were all sorts of problems that arose that all had to do with basically this quick densification. Like pollution became really bad, disease spread really quickly. If like your house caught on fire, there was like a non-zero chance that it would like set the whole city block on fire or like literally burn down like a whole the whole city. Like there were just all of these problems that we had never experienced before because they didn't exist if we all lived really far apart from each other. But we figured it out, and like now living in the city is pretty awesome, and we've kind of like figured out how to coexist at that scale. And there's no reason to believe that we should have figured out how to coexist on the internet within the span of like 10, 15, 20 years, like however you want to define the beginning of that. In fact, there's all the reason to believe that it would be really unlikely that we would have just like quickly figured out all these things. And so I guess, yeah, the reason why I am an optimist here is just because if you think of this as a new technology, like or not even new technology, but like an entire new way of living, we're like so clearly at the very beginning of this, and there's so much left to do. And so I kind of take all of this as fuel, I think, all of these problems that clearly exist with the internet today, and try to think about, okay, well, what is our version now of like fire departments and like plumbing and you know, all of the things that we had to figure out in the real world, we have to figure that out in the digital world. It's pretty much exactly the same. So yeah, that's been something that I've been thinking about for a while, and pretty much directly led to, I think, a lot of what we're doing at Cocoon and a lot of the work that I was even doing at the end of Facebook. But maybe like, I think it's easy to be like, yeah, I'm an optimist, but like, I think in my case, it's not that I'm just an optimist. It's that like, I think it's actually more of like a realistic look at things. Like it seems actually unrealistic to be so pessimistic.
I love that. It's like optimistic, realistic is a really great lens. I talked a little bit with Jason, who is one of our Renaissance Collective community members, and he had just like lots of energy and great questions around Cocoon. But I think related to what you were sharing, Sachin, he was really curious around like velocity and velocity of change. And so one thing that Jason mentioned he noticed is, you know, he's seen that a lot of startups are potentially taking much longer journeys. Founders are working on ideas for many, many years before we even sort of hear about it, or it emerges as like, you know, the new fire department or the next trend in sort of mainstream consumer tech. And so I'm curious, like, how do you think about velocity in terms of that change, you know, generally, but also sort of specifically in what you're working on at Cocoon?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought of it in velocity terms before. I guess maybe that, and if Jason is here, which I'm trying to scan the grid of, definitely interrupt me if I'm kind of taking this in the direction that you didn't anticipate. But I think like it's still pretty important in any startup environment to be like high velocity. Like you kind of have to constantly be pushing the ball forward. The thing that might be a little bit different is like the bar at which you could even solve a problem. Like there are some things where like you could literally like build an app in a hackathon or a weekend and like, and not just like an MVP kind of thing, but like there probably are, like if I think of some systems like, I don't know, like Airbnb or something, or like I think probably a lot of like marketplaces kind of follow this, or I can't think of a ton of good examples off the top of my head, but there are some solutions where like you could actually just like build a pretty fully functioning solution to this problem pretty quickly, and it could just start working. And yeah, Lexi, DoorDash is probably a good example. And of course, there's like things that doesn't mean that you've solved the problem fully. Like you have to figure out supply and demand, all these things. But like from like a feature set standpoint, like it's actually like quite simple. A counterexample is I like Notion as an example. Actually, like Notion had been working for a really long time, but if you think about what it would take for Notion to actually work for an organization, especially, it has to basically be able to replace lots of things for it to work. It's kind of like an all or nothing situation, and so it has to be like really, really fully featured. And
resources, or you need social resources in terms of.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if that was a question or not. But yeah, so I think like that's how I would think about it. Is there's categories of problems that require quite a bit of like either iteration or like require a level of full featuredness that just is going to take a really long time. And those tend to be, there's a bit of like a probably like a survivor bias or like selection bias maybe, where like those types of problems tend to go unsolved for longer because they require a certain level of like determination and grit and like resources and time and I think like the problem we're working on in Cocoon, even though it doesn't seem on the surface level like it should be one of these problems compared to something like Notion, which is maybe a little more of an obvious case, I think it actually is, and one of the reasons why it's been sort of famously unsolved, I think, for a really long time, is that the bar to actually like working is really, really high and requires a ton of work and time. But I think you still need a lot of velocity to try to get there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I guess, hey, Sachin, this is Jason. Just to add a little more color is, I guess that's kind of my point, is it's not so much about technology these days. It's really about behavior change and the amount of change that is required over a period of time. And that's kind of how I was thinking about velocity from my physics days. Is it seems like entrepreneurs these days are increasingly dedicating themselves to startups and movements or missions that require a lot of behavior change. And it seems like Cocoon falls somewhat into that category of getting people to change the way that they interact, moving from maybe these more dense platforms like you're mentioning, like Facebook, into a less dense social network, like a private network. So just curious, that was kind of what the thought process behind my question is. How much time do you think it'll take for Cocoon to get off the ground? Is what do you think? What are you looking for in terms of how much traction should you accomplish in a certain period of time for you to know that this is something you should keep working on? Or
I see. Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a couple of questions in there. One might be the like behavior change question, and the second would be maybe like what signals do you have that it's working? Does that sound right?
Yeah. Over a period of time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, so I think the behavior change thing is really interesting because I try really hard, and I think both in thinking about some stuff that I worked on at Facebook, but also for sure with Cocoon, to not try to invent any new behavior or require a ton of behavior change in order for my thing to work. And I think with Cocoon, what we're actually trying to do is observe a very natural behavior that is being jammed into an unnatural vessel, and then see if we can make a more natural container for that behavior. And so the like very quick thesis kind of for Cocoon is that sharing things with people you care about was a behavior that unfolded on social networks for a number of years. Social networks became a pretty unnatural place for sharing like everyday moments with a core set of people you care about because of a few reasons. Our audiences became everyone we knew, and there aren't that many things that are relevant for all of them. And then a bunch of other things, but that's sort of the big one. But like public feedback caused a really high quality bar. Like I have to make sure my thing will get enough likes, and also mixing everyone I've ever met in the comments, even though they don't know each other, and that's pretty weird. And then, I think those were kind of actually like the big ones. The permanence of things, I think, wasn't actually as big of a barrier as maybe it seems with stories doing so well. But basically, we used to be able to do this thing. We can't do this thing anymore on social networks, clearly. And so that behavior, which was a very natural behavior to want to do this, and it wasn't invented by Facebook by any means or by technologists at all. This is like a really, really just like core human behavior. But it found like a really good home on the internet for a few years, got kind of kicked out of social networks, and then found like a serviceable home in messaging apps. And the reason it's only serviceable is that messaging apps clearly solve this problem of it's not now everyone I've ever met in this giant square. I can share a thing to this very specific audience, and that unlocks a lot more sharing. But for a bunch of reasons, messaging apps also limit sharing. The biggest thing is that everything has to be worthy of like a push notification to everyone on that thread. And that introduces a pretty big barrier. You're not going to share like lightweight status update-y kind of things anymore. And that kind of sucks. you also can't share the same thing across multiple groups very effectively. And you have this single linear thread. And so everything you share has to be also worthy of like bumping this thread. And then for a bunch of other reasons, there's like a lot of awkwardness that can ensue. And so what we're trying to do is actually say like, okay, there's this behavior of like sharing asynchronous, lightweight, photo-centric kind of things with a small set of close-knit people that I care a lot about and want to share more with. Can't really do that on social networks anymore. It's happening a lot on messaging apps, but messaging apps are kind of unnatural vessels for this natural behavior. Can we create a more natural vessel for this very natural behavior? And that's kind of what we're trying to do with Cocoon. How do we know if it's working or not, and if you're on track, and if there's like some like signals that there's product market fit? Well, it's not going to be if like there's no way that like we can just basically shoot up to the App Store and everyone switches over from WhatsApp to Cocoon. And in fact, any amount of like we had this kind of funny situation where we like accidentally went viral in Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks after we launched. There was this like influencer who had a ton of Twitter followers and like tweeted out like, I found this really cool new app and it's kind of like Path and you can like add me as a friend. Here's my Cocoon code. And then all of his followers tried to like join his Cocoon, and Cocoon is not actually like an open network where you can have friends and followers. It's you are all in it together as a group. And so like that kind of broke. And then all these people were sharing their codes and tweeting out like, add me on Cocoon. And then it just like was a whole disaster. And the nature of small groups is that you have this constraint on virality, and our growth trajectory just needs to look like a little bit different. So like that's not going to happen. Like I think we wouldn't look at like, oh, Cocoon is not at the top of the App Store, it's not working. What we do look for is what is like the specific type of group chat for whom or for which messaging apps are especially bad. And it's not all group chats. It's definitely not, we're not trying to replace all the group chats that you're ever in and say they should all be Cocoons. In fact, most of your threads are better off in a messaging app, but there's probably one or two for most people that might be better off here, but might isn't good enough. So there's actually probably some people who have like group chats that are really, really bad in WhatsApp and iMessage for a bunch of reasons, and people have to mute them, and it's just like chaos. And like probably some people have some threads like this. And we basically need to find those like kind of the nuclei of that group who can rally a group over to Cocoon for a bunch of reasons, and like get those Cocoons going that would have the highest likelihood of success, and then kind of like layer on top of that. So that's maybe a long-winded answer, but like that would be how we would start to look at it. Like, is that little slice, is that little wedge of like Cocoons that would be the most likely Cocoons to start with, is that working? And then as long as you think that like the addressable market of people who could benefit from this is like not super constrained to just like these really strange, weird people that look like this, then I think you have, like for us, that gives us enough confidence that like, okay, we think we're onto something, we can kind of grow from here. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question either. That
was a great time, Sachin. And Jason, thanks for jumping in with the question. I'm going to open it up to other questions as well. And I think like Rush, you actually had one that was like pretty on topic for this. And just for folks that are just joining us, we're talking with Sachin about consumer social, like trends there. And then Cocoon is the app that he and his team are building. And so he's talking about some of the insights in terms of how they're thinking about that. But with that, I'll turn it over. Rush, you had a great question. Hop on in.
Hey, Sachin. So I was kind of curious, have you and the team kind of seen any emergent social behaviors that kind of surprise you, or things that groups are doing that you just completely out of nowhere?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's always, I think, one of the most exciting things about consumer social stuff is that you never know what people are going to do with it. And the more you try to control it, the worse your thing will be. And this is actually like a pretty big lesson from urban planning and city stuff as well, is that like there's this really great book by Jane Jacobs called The Death and Life of Great American Cities that I highly recommend for people building social software. But she talks about like the role of like emergent behavior on like sidewalks. And like you think sidewalks are used to like walk from point A to point B, and like that's what they're designed for. But if the sidewalk can't also be a host to all these other emergent behaviors, like letting kids play with each other and like letting people like randomly run into each other and you know, all these other behaviors that like if you go to a vibrant city, you'll see unfolding on a sidewalk, then it's going to be like a shitty sidewalk, even though it doesn't seem like it should be, given what it was intentionally designed for. And so yeah, we think about this a ton. It's one of the reasons why we also are pretty like agnostic about how, or non-prescriptive. And this is a lesson I think we kind of learned the hard way, where when we initially launched Cocoon, we said this is for long distance families who don't see each other ever, to share ambient stuff with each other, like location and all the things that you wouldn't share in a messaging app or in a social network. Like we have like a pretty deep health kit integration, so you can share things like even like your heart rate and your step counts, and we have location and all sorts of things. And like that was actually what Cocoon was kind of intended to be in the beginning. And the very first emergent behavior we noticed was that people didn't care actually that much about those kinds of things, and we're actually using it to like share photos. And we were like, this is weird, you can just share photos in like a group chat. Like, why do you need another thing for it? And then that kind of led us down a path of like kind of what I described, but like the insight there being that, well, you can literally share a photo in a WhatsApp thread, but you're not going to share a bunch of, like, there's a whole class of thing that you just aren't going to share because of those things that we just talked about. So the first emergent thing was for sure that people were actually kind of just looking for a space to do all the things they wanted to do with that group, not just one particular slice of thing that they could do with that group, and then find some other vessel for another particular slice of sharing for that same group. And then like no one wanted to like map that group out like 6 times in 6 different apps. And this was actually goes back to the question of like kind of the bar and why it is a bit of an all or nothing thing. Like in the case of Notion, it has to be better than G Suite. Like you have to be able to have like tables and documents and tasks and spreadsheet, like all these things. If you can't do it all, like it's just probably not going to work. And in our case, we kind of noticed that there was a bit of that going on. So that was, I think, the first thing. But like honestly, like that question is like literally is a new thing every week. Like that one was probably the most instructive though for our like early journey of like trying to find product market fit, and that basically people don't use it at all how you think or how we would have thought. And yeah, every week it's like a new thing.
And so can I do a quick follow-up actually?
Yeah, absolutely.
So going along with that, so it sounds like you kind of leaned in to the like social sharing of these photos and things like that. And so did that change your like target customer demographic? And if so, how did that affect your growth strategy?
Yes, it changed it because we realized that this wasn't just a long distance family niche companion app kind of thing. That there were, I mean, the other emergent thing we noticed was that there were friend groups that kind of found Cocoon. There were a lot of couples, even like support groups and people that would surprise us, like people that didn't really clearly seem like they would like have a permanent space like this for. And we noticed that the common thread was actually that it was groups that like actively wanted to invest in their closeness and feel closer to each other every day. And there are lots of means to that. Some of like one like way to get there is through ambient sharing of your location and your heart rate and your step count and that kind of thing. But like photo sharing is just like a pretty like obvious and important mean as well. And how it changed our strategy was that we realized that our sort of vertical was not like one type of relationship. It was a goal. So it wasn't families, it was closeness. And it was like, actually the strategy here is how do we build the best vessel for closeness, not how do we build the best vessel for families. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
That's a great lead in to something that I wanted to ask you about, that you and I have talked a little bit about, Sachin, which is how do you think about success for Cocoon, but also consumer social products in general? We've talked a little bit about engagement and screen time and some of the common ways that product managers or teams would measure success. And I think you have some really unique thoughts. And so I would love to hear both, like maybe from Facebook, but also in your work at Cocoon, like how do you think about actually measuring success and understanding if you're moving in the right direction with your products?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think it actually does kind of start with the like goal, like the thing that people are hiring your product to do, and then you kind of have to like figure out from first principles what are the like proxy metrics for that. And the reason that's really important is that, and I don't, maybe this isn't the case for like everything, maybe we're super weird, but like a lot of the typical ways you would measure a consumer app, I think, don't apply, or we don't care about them as much, given that our goal is actually pretty specific. So like, let's say our goal is closeness, which it basically is. If you use an app once a month for your, to do whatever in our case, but like if, let's say you have an app for your group of friends or your family or whatever, and you use it like once a month, it's really highly unlikely that that's going to actually make you feel closer to those people. And so if we were to measure like monthly actives, that probably wouldn't be useful proxy to whether this is actually working or not. If you dig into like the research on closeness, a pretty like simplistic way of looking at what makes a relationship stronger over time, or what like leads to a relationship feeling close, is that you need like a lot of like frequent lightweight interaction over an extended period of time, and it's like that makes you feel close. And even if once a month you got to hang out and do all these fun things in person or whatever, like a better strategy for closeness would actually be getting to like spend a little bit of time every day. And we looked at this a bunch when we were getting going, because it kind of leads into like the type of product that you like, the mechanics in the product that would lead to that closeness. And so we really want to like lower the barriers, for example, to like lightweight frequent sharing, that we thought could lead to closeness. But it's also the kind of thing that like just takes a lot of time. So we like qualitatively try to measure. We talked to a lot of people who now we're for the first time getting to talk to people who have had Cocoon going for like a year, and that's really what we're trying to get at. Like qualitatively, does this make you feel closer now than before? And that's like kind of a hard question to answer in the abstract, but we're trying to like get at that. That I think gives us some signal, like literally just by talking to people, that the product can kind of work as intended. Quantitatively though, like the things we look at, for example, are like session frequency, like how often are people opening the app and using the app. Care a lot more about that than time spent in the app. And in fact, we kind of anti-care about time spent because we want Cocoon to be an efficient like use of your time and not take up a lot of your time. And every other app is trying to take up a lot of your time. And the reason that they have to is because they are built for, they need to harvest a lot of time and attention in order to like make money. And so there's actually like a whole kind of big system design approach here of like the best solution for closeness probably wouldn't take up a lot of your time. In fact, it would probably not ever be able to even harvest a lot of time because you would only be using it with a few people. So like there's no scenario in which Cocoon could generate an hour of time spent a day, really, like compared to something like a Facebook or an Instagram. So we should not be trying to grow time spent. In fact, we should try to make it like work for you and be an efficient kind of tool in your toolkit of closeness and not try to like take your time. As a result, it kind of needs to not be an ads business. Even if there was no privacy implications, it would just be a shitty ads business. So like we kind of need to figure out a way for people to pay for it. And that kind of leads you down a path of like architecting it too. And so long-winded answer, but like I think it has to start with like the goal that you are trying to accomplish. And then you'll end up with like a pretty unique basket of things that you care about. In our case, it's like frequency, we care about a lot. Stickiness, in terms of like how many days in the last 7 days did somebody use Cocoon? Was it all 7 days that they opened it? Was it 6 or 5 or 4, 3, 2, 1? There's like a curve you can get out of that. We care about that a lot. We don't care about monthly actives or installs. And now we started to care a lot more about kind of basically active Cocoons, and we measure activity in like a pretty high threshold way, not just like somebody opened up the Cocoon, but like somebody created something and there was some sort of interaction.
Big beneficiaries in.
Thanks, Sachin. I wanted to tag in Callie, who I think had a follow-up question to what you were just sharing. Callie, can you jump in?
Of course. Thank you, Nadia. My question is related to what you were saying about, well, my question is just really like, how did that insight that you were trying to facilitate closeness change the way that you were building? Like, I imagine initially you were like, we have to go talk to families. And then what were you doing after you made that switch?
Got it. The way it actually kind of worked was that we had already kind of homed in on closeness as the goal, but we thought about it in a really narrow sense of like families that are long distance and don't get to see each other, kind of experience this like, we talked about it as like entropy, which was like, you all live together and closeness sort of flows whether you like it or not. Like someone comes home from work, they're having a bad day, you'll just like, no, you're just, if you think about that interaction frequency, it's just like constant, right? And then as soon as you disperse, closeness becomes really hard work to generate. And you have to basically actively fight against that dispersion of closeness. And so basically we were already pretty certain that like closeness or some form of measuring that would be what long distance families would need. The thing that changed, I guess, was that we realized that long distance families weren't as unique as we thought they were as a relationship type, and that like there wasn't actually as big of a difference between long distance families and like close friend groups or couples, or even in some cases like these support groups that popped up, that it wasn't like the family nature of the relationship that was the salient thing. It was the closeness was kind of like the goal was actually just more important than the relationship type. But it always kind of started from that. It wasn't like we never really started with like, what do long distance families want, and then let's build that, which would have been a pretty interesting approach actually. I'm sure other companies have like tried that.
I want to tag in Chelsea. We're shifting gears a little bit from like, how do you think about what you're building? How do you measure success to like, how like physically are you building it? So Chelsea, do you mind jumping in with your question?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Nadia. Hi, Sachin. It's nice to meet you. I found out about Cocoon a year ago and was floored by the design. So in that spirit, yeah, would just love to hear more about what your favorite design tools are, and then any stories or best practices around how the team is approaching product design.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll preface this with my co-founder Alex is the real brains behind the design operation, and has designed pretty much, I mean, literally every pixel and every screen. I spend a lot of time in Figma, but not like actually designing things. More like, and maybe to answer your question, like the way we kind of have our workflow is that usually we'll have like a pretty good sense for, we kind of operate on two timeframes. One is like, and we've even called, like we launched like Cocoon 2.0 in August. We had kind of like our 1.0 launch in November previously. We're kind of working towards like what like a 3.0 sort of North Star would look like. And these are all like from 1 to 2 is like a pretty big change in sort of the architecture and nature of the app. And we're kind of thinking about that next big jump as well. So we'll constantly be kind of in like brainstorm mode and like a lot of like written documents and looking at data now and like user interviews and like basically piecing together a vision for what that next, whether it's 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever North Star, like that's kind of in the like, this isn't like 1 or 2 years down the line. This is like, we're a really small team. We're trying to move really fast. This is more in the like probably a 3-month time horizon. And then at the same time, we'll be constantly trying to ship stuff every week. And those are much more tactical experiments. Like we have a hypothesis that like this bit of our funnel is broken because of this reason. Here's a thing that could maybe fix that. We have in most cases, there'll be like a Figma file that will be all ready to go before we start building it. Alex, my co-founder, will kind of like have a series of like very tactical things, like just like design this thing to do this thing. And we have a pretty simple system where like there's a bunch of things in that camp of like, we literally want to build this like birthdays product. We know exactly what it should do. Alex will create that in Figma. I'll usually go in and kind of do the like copy and the new user experience, like the message in the app that like, hey, now you can like do birthdays. And so like I'll usually kind of come in at the end, and then engineers will build that and we'll ship it. And then at the same time, we're kind of living mostly in like Notion and dashboards and usually there's a Figma file too that's like an overarching like mega like system of what the next thing is for that North Star. So yeah, that's kind of how we've approached it. I'll also say that I don't know if that's like a good way of doing anything, and I don't think we've like really figured that out. We're kind of just like making it up as we go along.
I love that. Thank you for being so open about your processes, and thanks Tulsi for the great question. Lexi, I know you had a question that got a couple of +1s. Would you mind unmuting and asking it?
Yeah, of course. This is the best. I'm learning so much. All right, dude. I have a question. Very topical. Long time listener, first time caller. So what's it been like for you and Alex coming? You know, obviously so talented at Facebook, so good at consumer, and like coming to lead a company from that. Like, how does it compare to working at Facebook? Like, are there things that are super applicable where like, oh, I'm using this and this is just like tool in the toolbox number 42, or does it feel like this is just a whole new world?
I guess it's probably a bit of both, and more skews towards like we don't know anything and we have to figure it out. The things that do feel like they are a very useful like pool of knowledge or whatever to draw upon, all that stuff about like cities and natural behavior and like that has nothing to do with Facebook, nothing to do with Cocoon, nothing to do with anything that we're working on. That's all just like kind of fundamental human behavior stuff that we spent a lot of time getting to think about at Facebook and learn from other really incredible people at Facebook. And we like, you know, I think back to some of like the research trips that we would do and like talking to Facebook users and just like the resources we had to like do research there. And like the data was just like so good. And so I think that is useful. In terms of like everything else, pretty much like operationally, I'd say in some ways we have to like unlearn like how to be like I don't know. I think the product management stuff and like you know how to recruit engineers at Facebook, super different than recruiting engineer number 3 at a early stage company. In fact, not only does it not scale, it like you have to not do the thing. Like it like I think we've made those mistakes and like yeah. So I think that would be my simple answer is that from a domain knowledge, like natural behavior standpoint, lots of good stuff. And then from like an operational standpoint, like this is like all new.
Got a lot of love for unlearning lessons. I think Carmine, you had a great like related question, sort of thinking about like growth as well. So I'd love for you to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. Sachin, hi, I'm Carmine. I'm a brand new member of the community here, and this is one of my first events. So appreciate you coming out, sharing your time and your wisdom with us. So my question was about like the super early days, like before you had any kind of like, you know, cred or funding or stuff like that. And you know, obviously you came in with the, you know, pedigree from Facebook, but like, how were you attracting those like first customers, like beyond like your personal network, family, friends, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about what we were building was that we could actually draw upon our family. I mean, our literal families. Like my mom is like the first Cocoon user, and our just immediate networks, because it's not so niche that like most people that like we could like we made a list of like just people that were in our networks and we're like, let's just like force them to talk to us and to try this thing. And that was actually like nothing, I think in the beginning. Then what we did is we tried a thing that actually ended up being pretty useful when we were still in the sort of like research phase. I created this survey in, I think, just SurveyMonkey, and it had a bunch of questions like the most instructive one was actually, although kind of maybe led us astray given everything else I said, was like, if you could, like an example of a question in the survey was, if you could wave a magic wand to know more about your family members than you do today, like what would you want to know? And it had a list of a bunch of things. And what we noticed was that the top answer was just like whether they're having a good day or not. And it was a lot of these like temperature check type things. It was like, did they have like an active day or not? Did they like for like, depending on the generation, like did they like even leave the house today, or like did they do anything? And it wasn't like I want more photos from them or whatever. And I think that was kind of a weird red herring, but like we basically created the survey and then we just sent it out to a bunch of people and told them to send it out to other people anonymously. And it was nice that we were kind of actually targeting a bit of like an older demographic, like literally like my parents and our parents on the team. We had them send it out to like a bunch of their friends, and we got some good kind of data from like that age range. And I got a bunch of just like my friends to send it out to some other people, and we got like 100 or 200 responses. And then we got emails from that, and that actually we like emailed back those people once we had a prototype. And so I'd say like it kind of was what you said. It was like initially it really was our family, our network, our second degree network, and that was quite useful. I don't think it works if you're building like a SaaS thing for lawyers or whatever, right? Like I think it could kind of only work in a certain broadly appealing thing, but yeah, it was. I guess I wouldn't understate how useful it was for us.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear that. So like, I guess to follow up on that then, like, is that still like the main driver of growth, or now are you doing some more like paid kind of stuff?
Our main driver of growth is a mix of, I guess at this point, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but there's some level of virality now that can kind of exist where if you're in a Cocoon, like you're in a group, some percentage of those people will go on to create another Cocoon, like another group, and invite their people. And so I think once now there's a bit of a base, like we can kind of see that virality play out. It happens on a pretty slow and steady time horizon though. Like I mentioned, it's not like you sign up for the app and invite everyone you've ever met, like that would be bad. And we noticed that there's a pretty long time delay in people going to create their next Cocoon. And we think because of that sort of like time element of closeness that you're not really even going to feel like a ton of value until you've been using it for a while. So we see people create another Cocoon like 6 months later for another group. So that is ultimately, we think, how this thing can grow in a way that that is actually a little more viral than it seems if you're building like a close constrained network. But we still have to find what we call pioneers, people who are going to create a first Cocoon, invite their initial group, have no context in like that, they don't have anyone that they can use the app with yet. They have to kind of like create that first Cocoon. And we found a bunch of those people through, I mean, not, we kind of tapped out our own network, but we get a lot of people who find us by like literally searching for like Facebook alternative or like private version of WhatsApp, private social network. So we've been trying to figure out search a bit more, although it's not really like dialed in yet. And press has been reasonably helpful for mostly for search. We're just mentioned in enough articles, I think, that talk about privacy and Facebook alternatives and social networks and new stuff that we get people who kind of find us by searching that and kind of like finding content that we didn't produce. So that's been pretty helpful. But like this is definitely in that camp of like, we have no idea. we're like trying to figure it out. We're starting to experiment a little bit with paid acquisition, and that probably will be a channel at some point now that we have a paid product too that can kind of help recoup those costs. But yeah, that's hard. I think finding those pioneers is really important, and it's just challenging for a lot of products, especially one where you can't benefit from the product at all until you go on to invite a group and assemble them and do a bunch of work. So there's like actually not that many apps that definitely not that many social apps. Most social apps, you sign up immediately. It's like, here are the 5 people that like, who are already here, just connect with them, start using it with them. Or even if you don't know anyone, here's a bunch of people that like are on the network that you can follow or whatever. In our case, it's like, we don't really want to surface that even if it would be useful. Like the likelihood that you would actually want to use this app with those people is basically zero. You have to invite people and do a bunch of work before you can experience the value. And that chicken egg problem is really hard. So we have to get pretty creative with how we find those pioneers, and it's hard.
I know, Sachin, time is absolutely flying. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So I think there's been a tremendous number of questions on how you think about growth. So I'm going to ask Lydia to jump in and ask hers, and then I'll probably read through some of the rest just to try to give as many questions as we can.
Sure, I can try shorter answers too. We can do like a rapid fire round.
So we'll do a little bit of rapid fire on growth, if that sounds good. And then I think we'll talk a little bit at the end of Cocoon, and then we have a ritual to end us out. But with that, Lydia, do you want to jump in quickly and ask your question?
Yeah, my question, thank you, was just a follow-up about that survey that you sent out and the definition of closeness. You know how boomers use Facebook differently than millennials, differently than other generations. How did you find that there was a different definition of closeness based on demographics?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it was such a fascinating answer for us. Basically people in like, I'll just generalize like our generation, just looking around the room, but like kind of like we call these like the middle generation is actually kind of what we called them. The problem that Cocoon kind of set out to solve for us was that it feels like a lot of work and a lot of burden on my part to maintain a close-knit bond with my family members that are not like living in my household, specifically parents that are aging. So it's almost like that was sort of why we, like, going back to that time spent thing, it felt like it was actually a bit of an efficiency problem. Like, I don't have the time to do the things that I know I should be doing to like feel like a better son or daughter. For our parents' generation, it was completely the opposite problem, which is I have all the time in the world. I don't have any, I'm not getting enough. And it's not a question of efficiency. I'm happy to do whatever. I just like wish my kid would call me more. And both of those are in kind of like an inventory problem. Like there needs to be a greater flow rate of stuff flowing between these two parties. And again, thinking about it very much in this sort of long distance family, multi-generation mindset, but it turns out that it ended up, I think, scaling quite well to other groups too. And so that was what we kind of realized was, okay, well, this is sort of where the ambient sharing comes into play, reducing all the barriers for more frequent stuff. We want to make it easy for those younger people to share more with their parents. And as a result, those parents are going to get more, and that like creates closeness. So the answer was really different depending. It took a little bit to kind of like tease that out. It wasn't like, yeah, I want to be closer. It was like, well, how? Like, why aren't you more close? And there was a pretty big difference.
So I think in sort of that theme, I think Callie had a good question around just what are some of the sort of acquisition and like growth metrics that you care about? And Jen had a related question around how do you know when to add a paid product in terms of like product offerings and growth?
Callie, can you quickly repeat that first question so I understand exactly what it was?
Sure. You'd mentioned, we were talking a little bit about like being anti-time, session length, et cetera, and some of the like those kind of usage metrics. And then I was just curious how you're thinking about acquisition and like what you're benchmarking against. Like if you have 5 new accounts, is that great? Or like, how are you thinking about the acquisition side?
Yep. Okay, well, yeah, retention is probably gonna, like in almost every case, I think, like you'll have some retention metric that you care about. In our case, we care more about daily and weekly retention than for sure like monthly retention. And we just look at like the J curve of like all the people that installed the app, how many of them used it again, 1 week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, whatever. And then you can kind of create like a sort of triangle chart. If you're familiar, if you search like triangle heat map, that'll be like the best possible way to look at this and whether your app is doing better over time. And it'll just like look at all of the cohorts and all of the time elapsed since they signed up, and it'll just tell you like, yeah, 14% of those people are here still. And the thing that we wanted to look for was that it flattens, that like eventually people just like stick with it. So that was the first thing. And in our case, like retention maps pretty closely to that closeness idea, because like you kind of just need to use it like continuously over time. On the acquisition piece, I don't know if we know yet that like, I mean, we'll have like days where like this is a good day or a good week, or this is like a less good day or less good week, but I actually don't think it matters too much as long as you have a strategy to improve always. So like now we've kind of taken on a growth goal of like wanting to grow at least 15% every month. And like, whether we're here, and if we're here, we grow 15% month over month, great. If we're here, we still got to grow 15% month over month. And like, I don't really care where I'm at in absolute terms, more like the momentum and the velocity. So yeah, that's more what we care about. And then then you can break that down. How are we going to grow 15%? We know that we have one channel, which is finding new pioneers in our case. We have another channel, which is getting existing users to create more cocoons. And we just got to like do a bunch of work to get both of them. The first one is mostly a marketing positioning problem. The second one is mostly a product problem. And I find that way that's a helpful way to break it down, because like I don't know if like X number of installs a day is like good or bad. Kind of doesn't matter. Just like how are you going to make it more than X?
So I think to go, that's super helpful, Sachin. And I think like to go to Jen's question, like how do you think about paid products? And Jen, elaborate on it as well.
Yeah, great question. We had to think about this pretty differently, I think, than most companies that would be like, all right, let's just like build a really good free product. And then at a certain point, we'll like try to monetize our free users by giving them some additional value that they can pay for. That seems like it would have worked in our case, but and maybe it would have, but we were pretty hesitant for a couple of reasons. One was that usually that strategy only works when you can get like a ton of free users and then build up a ton of time spent and attention, and then you serve them ads. Like that is a pretty classic playbook for social consumer. In our case, we just knew that like that never would work because of that time spent dilemma, that like the best product to solve this would actually never would never accumulate enough time spent. All right, what are other ways you could like monetize a free user base? You can like sell them, you can sell like 1% of them a premium thing. And that felt just like a little bit weirdly daunting for us, because all of the things that we would never want to feature gate Cocoon, because it would sort of like against the whole like premise of it. Like we don't want to like remove the ability to experience closeness. Like it just sort of felt like we couldn't wrap our heads around that. The final thing was that we realized that paying for a space like this turned out to be a bit more of a feature than a tax. And that's not true for everyone for sure, but we think there's enough people that are like actually looking for a thing they can pay for because they don't like the alternative of using a free service that is going to compromise their privacy or data or peace of mind in any way, that we're like, we think we can actually do this as a native thing. Like if we could find a way to make paying for Cocoon a feature, that would be like the strongest recipe here. And the way we are trying to do that is by making it so that one person can sponsor a Cocoon for the entire group that they're using it with, because it's like it'll be impossible, I think, to build a thing where everyone has to pay. So that was our approach, but we still took a while to like figure out that we should try that. And I don't know if it's the right thing or what, but that's where we're at right now. And the way we thought about that maybe is like interesting and scalable, that there are only a finite number of ways to do it.
That's awesome. So I know we're coming up on time. I want to sneak in one more question from Dan and Sachin. There's a couple more questions in the chat. Maybe I can follow up with you afterwards if we are at time. All right, Dan, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, so my question is around how, if your team uses metaphor in its day-to-day work, what's really remarkable in hearing you speak about Cocoon is your use of spatial metaphors, whether it's urbanism or pioneer, and all of that has resonated to me as a new being introduced to your product, because I also have a background in urban planning and architecture. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's awesome. But I'm very curious to what extent those metaphors also drive kind of day-to-day work, deciding which features to pursue, which populations to address. Like, is this also part of an internal culture?
Yeah, I think so. We talk about this a lot. I mean, the most common thing that we talk about is how there's a big difference between a space and a tool, and software blurred those lines in a really weird way, but they're really important. And so like in the real world, it's really obvious that like a hammer is a tool and like a room is a space or whatever, right? And like, that's just like really, really obvious. In software, it's all just pixels. But there's definitely some things that are like single purpose tools to accomplish X, and then other things that are like a space that can handle emergent behavior and can like the way we would define a space is it's like a space that like allows people to interact with each other for some purpose. We don't really know what that, like we have some, even closeness is super abstract. It's not like that tactical. You have to fill that space with tools then to like help accomplish that goal. But we talk about that a ton every day. Like in some ways, the defining feature of Cocoon is that it has more space-like qualities than anything else. Like even if you compare it to a group chat is a space, you could argue, right? But it has some weird elements for a space. It moves around in your inbox. Like that's really weird. It gets like re-ranked and reordered. It doesn't have a lot of spatial tendencies, whereas we think that it's pretty important to like, and I'll show you a quick example, but like this is a cocoon, and I can like zoom out of my cocoon and like get a bird's eye view of everything. And that felt like a pretty natural thing to be able to do in a space. You can't really do anything like that in a thread. You just have this like tiny little window, and you can just like scroll to a different window. And so, yeah, basically like everything, like that space tool dichotomy for sure has informed like every decision that we make, and we like debate it all the time.
Sachin, that's so great. And Dan, amazing question. I am going to go ahead and compile the rest of our questions in the chat for you afterwards, but
Sure.
We have a ritual that I believe actually like DK and Highlighter, which is very close to the RenCo community, created, which is we like to end with the ritual of having you ask us a question in terms of what's one thing that's top of mind. It could be serious, it could be silly, that you would want to get the perspective of RenCo. And we're a community of smart generalists. So you have lots of really smart, interesting people. But what's one question we can help you answer?
And is it like a live synchronous thing? Like I'll say it right now, and I'll get like a temperature check kind of thing?
You can definitely, you'll get probably like a flurry in the chat, and then I can also follow up afterwards too.
Oh man, okay. All right. Well, the question that when we chatted before, Nadia, the question that did come to mind when you first said this was, I'm always interested in getting a temperature check on the sort of like optimism versus pessimism poles of like the internet. Like are folks generally optimistic about maybe the way I'll frame this is my worry is that I've biased this a lot now, and that like hopefully I've convinced some pessimists maybe to be optimists, but maybe the more specific question would be like, in this exact current moment and for the very near future, because probably it's a little easier to be maybe long-term optimistic, I would love to get a temperature check on that. And it could be not even why you're or like that I am optimistic or I am pessimistic, but like the reasons why too. So that could be maybe harder to get a temperature check on, but that kind of came to mind still. And maybe bounding it to just like the present and near future could eliminate some of my bias that I've introduced upon everyone.
I'm seeing a lot of pensive faces, so I'll give folks like a moment, but we'll go ahead and wrap up because I know we're over. Sachin, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure having you. Lexi, thank you for the awesome intro. And Jen and everyone from RenCo and friends who attended, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's been like a crazy start to 2021, and this was like such a welcome reprieve from the news and everything, and it's great to spend just quality time with all of you. So big thank you again, Sachin, for joining us. This was absolutely awesome.
Thank you so much for hosting me. Yeah, this was a ton of fun. Such good questions. And yeah, I am happy to answer whatever was remaining, or I think maybe my email address, Nadia, it's just sachin@cocoon.com. But if anyone has any other things that they wanted to chat about at any time, message anytime.
Thanks, Sachin. Well, team, have a great night. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Wednesday. I'll definitely follow up with the questions. We'll also have a survey. Please fill it out if you get a chance to give us feedback. We'll share it with Sachin, and it's super, super helpful for me as well, just to know how we can continue to improve and iterate on our operator you should know sessions. But thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night. Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
See you later.
That was the best.